to have Ben here with us tonight. I think we're in for a very interesting evening. So Ben Wickey is here to present his debut graphic novel, More Weight. This book is many things. If you've read it or even glanced at it, you know it is very powerful and it is devastating. It is beautiful. Once you start this story, you really can't stop reading. I can attest to that. I stayed up way too late reading this. And the horror, of course, is that it's all based on true events. And it moves seamlessly through different times, the present, 1692, and later in the 1860s. Ben is an artist, writer, and animator. He's one of the contributing illustrators of Alan Moore and Steve Moore's The Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic. He's the illustrator of Key Longfellow's The Illustrated Vivian Stanshall, and the director of several stop-motion animated short films, including the award-winning The House of the Seven Gables. More Weight wrestles with the complex legacy of the Witch City and what it shows us about the best and worst of humanity. Hand-drawn over a decade, More Weight is a stunning visual symphony, a unique and profound inquiry into the infamous Salem witch trials and the long shadows they still cast on us all. A few snippets from reviews he's already gotten, which is not easy for a debut novelist or graphic novelist. Publishers Weekly, in a starred review, says, "Shot through with tragedy and dark humor, this ambitious volume makes readers feel the weight of history." Forward Review calls it a monumental graphic storytelling achievement. And Book Riot says, "Stunningly illustrated and meticulously researched, as it spirals toward its inevitable conclusion, the reader is forced again and again to confront the true costs of abandoning logic, reason, mercy, and justice." If you've not already, please silence your cell phones and help me welcome Ben Wickey.
Hi, everybody. This is so great. Jabberwocky's always been one of my favorite bookstores in New England, and you know, my publisher, Top Shelf, who's owned by IDW, and they said, you know, oh, you want to go around and talk around New England, where do you want to go? And one of the first places I thought of was Jabberwocky, because this is such a wonderful place, and it means a lot to me to be here, honking away and selling my wares. So yes, I have been working on this book for 10 years. Like a lot of people, I read The Crucible in high school, and my English teacher basically gave us a little prompt, a little thing to do of, you know, choose somebody from the play that you find interesting and write something from their point of view. I was very interested in this character of Charles Corey, this 80-year-old farmer from Northampton, England, who, spoiler alert, was pressed to death in 1692 after refusing to not after refusing to confess, but he maintained his innocence till the end, but he refused to stand trial at his arraignment. For that, he was pressed to death. And it was a story that really struck me. It is sort of one of the first, you know, documented protests in American history, and it's something really worth looking into. And so, you know, when, you know, it was just a high school thing, and I was going through things, and, you know, I wanted to find out what else had been written about Charles Corey besides, you know, what Arthur Miller did with The Crucible. And I found, let's see, is it the, oh, there it is. There we go. I found it. I found a play from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow from 1868. It's part of a collection of two plays that he published in 1868 called The New England Tragedies. And we usually think of Longfellow as someone, you know, who wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, The Psalm of Life, The Song of Hiawatha, you know, very quaint, beautiful poetry, often very positive. And in these two plays, I saw some of the angriest, bleakest, you know, it's very dark stuff. It's also very strange and atypical of Longfellow to write plays and rather than poetry. The first play in this book is John Endicott, about the persecution of the Quakers. And the second one is called Giles Corey of the Salem Farms. And it really struck me and moved me reading it. And it really felt that Longfellow had put quite a lot of himself into Giles Corey, because the 1860s was a really tough decade for Longfellow, and a very discouraging and dispiriting decade for him. The tragic death of his wife in a fire in 1861, his son Charlie, against his father's wishes, went to join the Union Army in the Civil War and was shot through the spine, but survived, but it was very traumatic for Longfellow. And so a lot of his anxieties and anger and angst, I think, came out through this character of Giles Corey in ways that you wouldn't see even in people like Miles Standish, who he would write a poem about before. He makes Giles Corey an even darker and angrier force than even Miles Standish, who of course did horrific things in Plymouth. And so I was just about to start CalArts and film school, and I wanted to have a screenplay under my belt. And I went off to California, and I thought, I should do something about Giles Corey. I really wanted to do something. That story just really stuck with me, and it wouldn't let go of me. And so in 2015, I thought, maybe I'll write a screenplay about it, and then I thought, well, I want to draw these people. I'm an illustrator. I really want to see what these people look like and draw them and act them out myself. But to do that, I probably have to do a graphic novel or a big comic book, and I didn't know how to do that. But I had done enough of storyboarding for my own, sort of creepy stop motion films and illustration, and I thought I can combine these and kind of teach myself along as I go how to do a graphic novel. And so in 2015 I did kind of like a dummy kind of mock-up fake cover, so I could maybe just visualize in my head, like, okay, I can see this as a thing existing in the world. I think there's a few graphic novels now about the Salem Witch Trials, but back then there was none really that I could find. And originally the plan was just to have a straight adaptation of Longfellow. And then just going through the book, I would also do some research on the side, and as I'm going, I would go, well, Giles Corey didn't live on the Ipswich River. He lived in modern Peabody. Well, all right, I'll change that. And then I keep going, and I go, well, this person didn't say this on this day. This happened months later. All right, well, I'll change that too. And then so as I went, and the more I researched, and the more really obsessed I got with getting it right, getting the history right, the Longfellow bits got smaller and smaller and smaller. And my own passion and conviction in trying to do a historically accurate rendition of what happened in 1692, that took precedence in my mind, and it became this book 10 years later. So like any menace to one's life, it really started out innocent enough, and if I'd known that I was setting out to do a 530-page graphic novel, I probably wouldn't have started. And of course I was researching as I was drawing, which I thought was the wrong way of going about it, writing and drawing as you're researching. But then I saw a great interview with David McCullough, who wrote, of course, the great biography on John Adams and really great history books, mostly about the Revolutionary War, but others. I think he wrote a book about Harry Truman and Teddy Roosevelt. And he said, no, I always research while I'm writing, because then you're writing from a point of view of curiosity, and you're asking questions while you're working. And when you do that, you allow the reader to also be asking questions. You're writing from the point of view, you're writing with an inquiring eye. So I said, well, that's good enough for David McCullough, so I guess I'm not doing something totally right. Oh, incidentally though, I started drawing, this was really one of the first drawings I did of Giles Corey, and as you can tell, his nose is a lot longer than it is here. The more I drew him, the smaller his nose got, and so I had to go back into older artwork and digitally pug up his nose. Little trivia. A little detail behind the wizard's curtain. So the book focused mainly on Giles Corey and his wife Martha Corey. They were real people in the Salem witch trials. Halfway through doing this book, though, I realized from a cousin in Michigan that my 10th great grandmother was Mary Easty, one of the last people to be hanged in Salem as an accused witch on September 22nd, 1692, which really changed my approach. You know, it really gave me a bit more passion and conviction, and it really made me feel even more, not only anger, I gotta admit, as to how the history has been remembered or misremembered in the place where it happened, but also just the real drive to make it as accurate as I could and as true and respectful as I could. But we really focused on Giles Corey and Martha Corey. They were married on my birthday in 1690. So they'd only been married for 2 years, or a year. So they lived in modern day Peabody. Martha had a mixed race son named Benoni, which is Hebrew for son of my sorrow. He was half indigenous. And we just know through the fact that Giles accused his own wife of witchcraft. Not accused, but formally testified against her at a time where she was already accused by the Putnam family of being a witch. He didn't help. So we know that he was a very superstitious and cautious old man. He was 80 at the time, as I said, and the year after his birth in Northampton, England, there were witch trials in Northampton that were, only a few blocks away from where he was baptized. So we can think, perhaps, maybe baby Giles was brought there. This witch hunts of Europe and of specifically England had kind of followed people across the Atlantic, especially Puritans. So the book really focuses on Giles Corey and his sort of redemption arc. I think he's always just fascinated me because here's a man who was swept up in the, I don't want to say hysteria because that implies that this was random when it wasn't, but he was swept up in the panic, swept up in the paranoia, swept up in this really big crisis in New England that spread from Salem Village, now Danvers, into, reaching as far up as Maine. It affected Andover, it affected Gloucester, where I'm from, it affected, it was all over the place, and hundreds of people were accused. Only 25 people died, 19 men and women hanged within the year of 1692. One man, Giles Corey, pressed to death, and 5 people dying in prison, including a newborn baby. That's what happened in Salem. That's why it's important to talk about this. And it was really fun for me to, not fun, but it was interesting. He was kind of he was an irresistible character. Here's a person that was swept up in all of this and then realized too late how mistaken he was and how much damage he had caused in his own family. The book also it's peppered throughout the book are scenes in the 19th century through a kind of Gothic literary lens with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Of course, Hawthorne, as you might know, was the descendant of John Hathorne, who was one of the judges in Salem during the witchcraft trials. And so much of Hawthorne's short fiction, like Young Goodman Brown, but also his novels like The Scarlet Letter or The House of the Seven Gables, very much deals with that legacy of the Puritan guilt that he would have felt growing up in Salem. as a young boy, especially, where all these legends of, local legends of the witches of Salem were plentiful in his boyhood. So the book takes place in 3 centuries. Mostly takes place, of course, in the 17th century, in 1692, but I also wanted to show, because the beginning of the book and the end of the book takes place in modern-day Salem, the modern-day witch city. And I didn't really want to, violently throw the reader back and forth over the years, across the centuries, between modern Salem and that of 1692. I kind of wanted to have some kind of grounding element. And so here you've got Hawthorne and Longfellow walking through 1860s Salem. And the great thing is that, there's so many buildings that are here in the 1860s that you might recognize today, but of course, there's so much that has changed. Really, because I just wanted to show that history doesn't happen, history doesn't happen in a vacuum. History happens in our backyards. It happens, where we live, under our feet. All we have to do is dig and unearth the truth, however troubling or inconvenient to what we want history to be, what we want the past to be. There are some things that are just stains on our history that we can't get away. We can't run from. We have to face. We have to remember these things not as they're advertised, but as they actually happen. And I tried to do that with this book. And the seagulls over time are replaced with drones. Here's my cat Klaus. He's my assistant. He's surveying the art before it's scanned. So all the 17th century bits, the 1692 bits and otherwise, are done by hand with pen and ink and graphite and inks and washes, and I just wanted to get it kind of rugged and handmade. And then the 19th century bits and the 20th and 21st century bits are, the post-photography age bits are drawn digitally and with a lot more photo reference and stuff, just to show that, these are places that you can visit. These are locations that you can visit. You can take the book and walk around, not just Salem, but all over the North Shore, at least, in places where the book concerns itself, and know where things happened, which I think is, not a lot of books do that, Not a lot of books show the context of place. I wanted the sense of place, and Klaus knows his place. There are no pictures or portraits from the time of the victims. We don't know what they look like. We might have a description of the Reverend George Burroughs, who was hanged in August 1692. Oh, he was a short man. He had dark eyes. He was short but very strong. He was kind of vulcanized. So I would draw that. But other than that, we don't really have much of a physical representation of what people look like. So I had to kind of invent looks for people so that you can, especially so that other descendants can look at their ancestor and go, oh, I recognize you. They can have a face. It's not the, it might not be the real thing, but it's like a duck decoy. It's good, it does the job, People can know that, okay, this person didn't have green skin. They weren't really a witch. They were a person like me trying to get through life. But we do have portraits of the people who were responsible for putting them to death. We've got Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village. This is a little teeny tiny miniature portrait of him that's in the Danvers Historical Society. This is around 1689, before the witch panic began. This is him, full kind of paranoid Nixonian, in the throes of the witch crisis. We've got the Chief Justice of the Court, Boyer and Terminer, William Stoughton. This portrait, if the historian, my friend Margot Burns, is correct, and I think they are, this portrait might actually be from the early 1800s, so it probably doesn't look like him at all, but I wanted to draw that scary long face. We also have, we know about, people from the time like Cotton Mather or Judge William Sewell there, not William Sewell, Samuel Sewell. We know them by their portraits, and we know them, portraits of them as old men, but these people were young in 1692, you know, so I kind of had to de-age Samuel Sewell there. He was a young guy. Cotton Mather was only 30. We think of him with a big powdered wig, this kind of old fat man, but no, he was my age, he was 30. And then we've got, of course, the, I say this because it's true, not because it's unkind, the illiterate treasure hunter who was the governor at the time, Sir William Phipps, who you know, created the court of Hoyer and Terminer and left the whole government pretty much to the lieutenant governor, William Stoughton. He left the government and the proceedings in Salem over to him while he scampered off to Maine to fight indigenous people and the French. And we'll talk about what he found when he came back from Maine months later. Some cursory, you know, we all have some idea of how this began. In February of 1692, you've got Salem Village, which is now Danvers, the home of Samuel Paris there, giving us a lecture, sermon. His children start behaving rather strange, and a local physician, Dr. William Griggs, says that they are under an evil hand. There is no medical or scientific explanation for why these children are contorting and writhing and shaking and just behaving very strangely. Paris has an enslaved indigenous woman, not black, but indigenous woman, Tituba, who is portrayed in The Crucible as being this kind of voodoo practicing, chicken sacrificing necromancer. But no, she was from Barbados, she was indigenous. She didn't do any witchcraft or folk magic at all. She was actually instructed by a white neighbor, Mary Sibley, to bake, basically take the urine of these girls and to bake them into these little rye cakes or witchcraft charms and feed them to the dog. And by doing that, you would find the guilty witch. There was this idea of effluvia, this idea that there was this invisible link between the guilty witch and the victim. And so if the dog was if the effluvia, you know, from these girls was in these cakes, and if you're feeding it to a dog, and the dog is eating them, then if there is a woman in the village who's screaming and crying out as if she's being bitten and eaten alive by a dog, well, then we found our witch. This is old folk magic. This isn't witchcraft. This is old English folk magic back in the early modern period, which is really the golden age of witch hunts. We think of it as like medieval. No. The golden age of witch hunts was in the early modern period after the invention of the printing press, up until the Enlightenment, really. And there was, of course, this idea of there were people, cunning people. There would be people in old Europe and England who would use folk magic to heal or prevent bewitchments, and they were usually not accused of witchcraft themselves. And Mary Sibley over there was not accused of witchcraft, even though she had done this kind of weird folk magic. And she wasn't arrested and she wasn't hanged. You know, so there's a difference that I think we lose sight of. Anyway, this of course spreads to the home of Thomas Putnam and his daughter Anne Putnam. And the Putnam family accuses over 40 people of witchcraft in 1692, and the thing just spreads, you know. And it starts out with 3 people, and it just grows and grows, and over time, nobody is safe.
40 people, that's a huge chunk of population at that time, too, isn't it?
Back when you could fit all of New England in Fenway Park, I think, and only 25 people lost their lives, too, so hundreds of people were accused, and the jails were filling up with people. And of course, there's a tendency in pop culture versions of the story where it's a crucible or it's a movie or a TV show. Usually it ends with the last people getting hanged, and then people are watching them hanging there, and they get sad and they go home, and that's the end. But I wanted to show that no, this had consequences. This meant something. This meant something to American history. It meant something to New England and Salem, certainly. And there's a political aspect to this which we don't often hear about or talk about. Really what happened in Salem was Puritanism's desire or wish to regain ecclesiastical dominance in the New World. It had been 70 years since John Winthrop coming into Salem and Boston and making his famous City Upon a Hill speech, which was really the foundation of the Puritan religion in New England and the Puritan hegemony. New England was run by the Puritans for many, many years. And by 1692, the Massachusetts Bay Colony did not have a charter with which to govern itself, and so everything was languishing in legal limbo. And in May of 1692, by which time hundreds of people are in jail, the newly appointed governor, Sir William Phipps, the treasure hunter, he comes across the Atlantic, he arrives in Boston with increased matter, and they finally have a charter. Oh my God, thank you! We finally have a charter. We can finally have a government. We can finally have laws and govern ourselves like adults, It was very much just waiting for the mother country, England, to trust these Puritans with some new independence. Let's not forget that Charles I was beheaded in the 1640s by Cromwell, who was a Puritan, and now after the Reformation we have, the monarchy back in England. They're not really keen on dealing with the Puritans, these kind of crackpots across the Atlantic. But Phipps comes in and he hears about, there's witchcraft here? Oh my God. This idea, we finally have a charter. But the charter now, they look at what the charter says and they go, oh my gosh, this charter, we're happy to have anything by this point. After 8 years, oh my God, we finally have something. But it recognizes Quakers? We hate Quakers. We've been boring holes in the tongues of Quakers for generations. It recognizes Catholics and Baptists and other kinds of Protestants as well. What next? The Antichrist? It was so Puritanism has sort of lost its special place in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And then, of course, you've got the thing that they really don't need by this point are accusations of witchcraft in Salem, which was thought of as the beating heart of the colony. It was the first settlement. They took it personally. They felt, oh my gosh, Satan has declared war on us in the heart of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Not in Boston, but in Salem. That meant a lot to them. And so the idea was, well, if Satan has declared war on us, then it has to be Puritanism that is visibly winning that war in the eyes of the mother country. Can't be the Quakers, can't be anybody. We have to be the ones who nip this in the bud so that the mother country doesn't hear about how Satan has taken over our Bible Commonwealth and they're going to deny us even more rights. So what we're going to do is we are just going to exterminate as many people as we can. And so the priorities were completely skewed. It wasn't about let's make sure that we're condemning we're condemning guilty people. Let's make sure that we have enough evidence to properly convict this person of witchcraft. That is not the priority. The priority is just to get this under control. And as I said, it led to the deaths of 25 innocent people, including Giles Corey down there. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about this slide. And also, of course, there is an aftermath. By September 22nd is the last day of the hangings. By this time, 19 men and women have been hanged. Giles Corey's been pressed to death. There's lots of people in prison. Some of them have died in prison because the prison conditions were so horrific. William Phipps comes back from Maine and he finds out that his own wife has been accused of witchcraft. Well, he knows his wife isn't a witch. And so there he is up there going, my wife! So he, in October of 1692, he dissolves the court that he himself created, this emergency court. He dissolves and he pardons the rest of the people in jail. He immediately puts together a publication ban. He's trying to really do some damage control of basically thinking, oh God, some of these people might have been innocent. They still believe in witchcraft, in witches and witchcraft. So it's kind of, they're starting to go like, well, maybe some of them were innocent. So maybe we were a bit too hasty. So he puts a publication ban together, and it's too pixelated here to see, but basically saying, I don't want this to get out of hand, so I'm just going to have some control. And conveniently, only Cotton Mather is allowed to write about what went on, and he's very, well, the judges did all they could, and of course we were, acting in the very best interest. Maybe some of them were innocent, but hey, it was a thing worth doing. And this, of course, tarnished Cotton Mather's reputation for the rest of his life. To the point where, in the 1720s, when he's an old man in a powdered wig, there's a smallpox epidemic ravaging Boston, and Cotton Mather has actually been looking at things under microscopes, and he's understanding germs and microscopic disease. And so he is in favor of inoculation, this new medical marvel that's going to save lives from smallpox. And a bomb is thrown through his window in Boston. And it says, Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with this, with a pox to you. And the bomb was a dud, he survived. But it's interesting, he's kind of the boy who cried witch in many ways. Here he was, who used to be so trusted in terms of the invisible world and the world of spirits and the world of evil, of devils and evil spirits and witchcraft. And now he was not trusted on the subject of microscopic disease. Just going through, there were plans and people really trying to exonerate the last of the people. They exonerated a few people. In 1711, there were still a good handful, about 6 people, plus Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who was still alive. She was pardoned by Phipps, who were not exonerated. And so these 6 victims who had been hanged were still, in the eyes of the government, still witches, including Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who's still alive, and now she has no civil rights, and she has to live the rest of her life under this horrific brand of witch. And we'll get into her. We'll get to her in a second. A committee was formed by the families of the judges. This was very interesting. In the 1730s, the sons of Judge Samuel Sewell, the only judge to publicly apologize for his actions, his misjudgment in Salem. After he died, his 2 sons down there tried to set up a committee to give money to the families of the accused who still couldn't, shake the stain, the label of witch. They were still if John Proctor or someone like that is denied his civil rights, and then his widow survives, she can't get any land because he's still dead in the law, as they say. And so a lot of people were suffering. A lot of families, generations after the witch trials, were really still suffering. And the committee failed. Well, it was thwarted by Cotton Mather's descendant, who was like, let's not talk about how my family completely misjudged the moment. Let's have a memorial to my ancestors instead. So it wasn't for another 200 years until the 1950s that the Massachusetts legislature took up the case again of formally exonerating these people, which is insane to me. John Adams came to Salem in the 1760s, I think 1766, so 10 years before 1776. And he was visiting his sister-in-law in Salem, and he writes in his diary about visiting Witch Hill. It's important to remember, too, that there was a lot of intentional, willful amnesia, intentional forgetfulness in Salem as to where the executions actually took place. For many years, people thought it was a place called Gallows Hill. Only in recent years, as I'll get into, they realized it was a completely different other place, a little ledge behind a Walgreens. But here is John Adams on Witch Hill, so we don't know which, we don't know which Witch Hill that would have been. I include this little panel here because it's important to remember, this country was founded by lawyers who all would have studied what happened in Salem, and so they knew how theocracies end. They knew what happens when you have no separation between church and state. They knew from Salem's hideous example the value of secular laws and secular, Enlightenment values, and that's why we don't have witch hunts here anymore, thanks to that. I'm just gonna keep going. Nathaniel Hawthorne is born in 1804 on the 4th of July. As I was saying, he grew up, with this legacy of the witch hunts, the witch trials. You've got Charles Wentworth Upham there, the first man to actually write seriously as a historian about what happened in Salem. And in 1892, on the bicentennial of the witch trials, a memorial was proposed. That's a picture of the memorial. They still thought it was on Gallows Hill where the executions were. And people from the Peabody Institute were saying, let's finally, after 200 years, let's finally have a memorial to these people. But it turns out, no, it was still a controversial subject locally. Because we thought, well, we don't want Mr. Putnam, in the next town over in Danvers to be reminded about how his ancestors accused over 40 people of witchcraft. So let's just forget this. Let's not have any memorial. Let's not do anything. Let's just forget this ever happened. It's a stain on our history. Let's just let it be. And so instead of that, for the bicentennial of the witch trials, you see lots of pictures of witches on broomsticks everywhere. That was instead how they remembered the witch trials. And the term, the sobriquet of witch city, had already been coined in the 1860s by a fish packing plant, I guess. But by 1892, you see the words witch city everywhere. And that's really where the witch city brand began. It began out of, it fundamentally came out of a refusal to come to terms with, a really dark and horrific past. Arthur Miller comes into Salem in the 1940s and writes The Crucible. I will only go on a rant about The Crucible if you ask me to. There's not enough time in my own presentation here. In the 1950s, though, there's still people who have not been exonerated, by the legislature. And so the Massachusetts Senate comes together and there's a motion, that's put forth of let's finally exonerate these people. And a Wakefield senator named George Jelly Evans, I don't know if his nickname was Jelly or if that was actually his middle name, but he stood up and he vetoed the thing and he said, if we exonerate the last of the Salem witches, what will happen to our tourist trade? And because of that, it didn't happen. And
Where
then,
was he
of
from?
course,
Where was he from?
Wakefield.
Wakefield.
this is what our tourist trade. Like, what is he talking on behalf of Salem? But in 2001, all but one of the victims, or people condemned for witchcraft in 1692, were formally exonerated by the government, which is a bit late, if you ask me. In the 1970s, when people are experimenting with LSD and things like that, you've got a woman put out a paper in a science magazine thinking, oh, what if these girls that were accusing people of witchcraft, what if they were suffering from ergotism, which is like a weird, ergot is a fungus in wheat. If you know anything about the Salem witch trials, there's probably somebody going, yeah, I think, wasn't it started by moldy bread, or something like that. This was immediately debunked right after it was first proposed, and yet still it is a pestilence to historians. Everyone is always out. Now, did that start with moldy bread? No, it didn't start with moldy bread. I always have these kind of austere bric-a-brac busts of the historians, many of whom have looked at this book and who have given it their approval and praise, and that means a lot to me. And they are sort of the giants upon which I'm perched, like a little, goblin with my pens and papers. And, without their research and decades of devoted research, I wouldn't have been able to do this book. So, I really owe it all to these lovely folks. In 1992, there is finally a memorial in Salem to the witchcraft trials victims. It was dedicated by Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel. In 2005, there was the Bewitched statue, a rather homely statue of Elizabeth Montgomery. Thank you. It's a bit toothy, if you ask me. It doesn't look like her. In 2016, historians finally confirmed that the place of execution in 1692 was not on Gallows Hill, but it was actually on a little rocky ledge closer to town, but still would have been beyond the barrier wall, the town wall of Salem town. And it was this little ledge, little hill, a rocky ledge behind Walgreens. And in 2017, they created a memorial, a second memorial in Salem to these people. Mercifully, it is far away from the main tourist foot traffic, and it's more of a place of calm and reflection. In 2022, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who was pardoned by Sir William Phipps, but she still lived the rest of her life, with people believing that she was a witch. She was finally exonerated by the Massachusetts government thanks to a middle school, an 8th grade middle school class. Wow. So that was, so 1692 to 2022, it's, it's 330 years. I mean. Also in 2019, Donald Trump, when he was complaining about his impending impeachment, wrote a letter to Nancy Pelosi saying more due process was afforded to those accused in the Salem witch trials, which is just not true. And so, I want to leave the remainder of my time. All right, we're good. I want to leave the remainder of my time for questions from you guys, but I want to end with this little bit from my ancestor Mary Eastie's petition. This was a letter to the judges, only a few days before she was executed. But the Lord, he knows it is, if it be possible, that no more innocent blood be shed, which undoubtedly cannot be avoided in the way and course you go in. I question not but your honors to do the utmost of your powers in the discovery and detecting of witchcraft and witches. It would not be guilty of innocent blood for the world. But by my own innocency, I know you are in the wrong way. as will appear, if not in this world, I am sure in the world to come, whither I am going. So I wanted to give her the last words there. And with that, I want to open it for questions. Thank you guys so much. Yes, sir.
You mentioned something about school children being involved in the last
Yes.
exoneration. Is there more to that story?
Yes, I can't. Was it in Rowley? No, it wasn't in Rowley.
North Andover.
North Andover, thank
Harry
you.
LaPierre.
Yes, that is this.
Yeah.
Yes, Carrie LaPierre's class in Andover, thank you. North Andover. They basically studied Elizabeth Johnston Jr. They went through all of her documents, which used to be at stewarded by the Peabody Essex Museum in a little research library in Rowley, but they're now stewarded or in the possession of Boston Boston government. Yeah, and basically they put together this project of petitioning to the Massachusetts legislature to formally, and there's a documentary coming out soon called The Last Witch, and it focuses on these kids and Carrie LaPierre and the path towards getting this last condemned woman pardoned and fully cleared 330 years later.
Wow.
Do you know why she was exempted from exoneration the first time around? When the others were exonerated?
I think they forgot. I don't know if they just forgot about her because she lived, or yeah.
So one of my friends is Mary Bingham, who is a descendant of Mary Esty.
Okay, cool.
And she's done a lot of research on Elizabeth Johnston Jr.
Yes.
She calls her EJJ.
Yeah.
So from what I've heard is they forgot about her.
Yeah.
She had no relatives to really fight for her except for her brother.
Right.
And she actually wrote a letter in December that year to the court, being like, "Hey guys, you forgot me," and they ignored the letter.
Yes.
And whether she passed away not long after, or some people theorize she lived to the 1750s, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But they said they forgot about her.
Yeah.
Because she'd never married, as far as we know, and so she never had that background, which is also why people believe that people like Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, and stuff were never exonerated, because, for example, Bridget Bishop's granddaughter was only 4 years old.
Yeah.
She probably never grew up realizing who her grandmother was.
Right.
And also, like, I hate saying this, I work at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead
Oh, very good.
in Massachusetts.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I've always said that the Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Ann Peter, Alice Parker, Margaret Scott, like those last few
Yes.
women that were exonerated were kind of like the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Nobody really wanted to touch that.
Yeah.
And so that's why they kind of like...
The last shake of the bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we won't worry about those guys. Exactly. Yeah. Which is itself damning, Because Rebecca Nurse was exonerated because she had this big family, system fighting for her and petitioning for her well before she was executed, and of course trying to get her exonerated after her death. So what was it, 1711, right? That she was
September
yes.
13th, 1711.
Very
Or
good.
12.
Yeah.
I know my dates.
Yep. Yes, very good. Thank you. And I think it was the same day or thereabouts that Giles Corey was finally exonerated. Once it was proven that
Yes.
his death was not a suicide,
Yes.
even though he was buried on a crossroads where allegedly buried on a crossroads which was symbolically where they would.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was
suicides.
Buttsbrook. My friend,
Yes.
my best friend lives in West Peabody, actually like half a mile away from where the Coreys lived.
Yeah.
So we go over there every so often. We go to the Crystal Lake Memorial or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we drive over it all the time. She's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, sorry, Giles."
Yeah. Going by. Yeah. I wish they would do, because there's a little pot of land where the Coreys lived. It's next to a trailer park. It's on private property, but I wish they would do like some archaeological excavation.
I was about to make my metal detector.
Yeah, I know, me too. But...
My best friend lives on his land and we metal detect.
Really?
Yeah.
Can I go with you someday? You can find some.
You are always welcome.
I found Giles' belt buckle. Right?
Well, in this house, we'll get it together.
Very good. Oh, that would be great. That would
Did
be
they ever
really, really
find
great.
anything?
Not related to anything that, I mean, a lot of that's already
Yeah.
contemporary, like housing over there.
Sure,
But
sure, sure.
it's been disturbed before.
Yeah. And we have no idea what the Corey's house looked like. So in my book, I kind of based it on the Whipple house in Ipswich, just because I don't know. I like the shape of it.
Ben?
Yeah, hi
I
Janet.
don't know if I missed the part. Where was, I hate to use the word press, but where,
Yeah.
what area in this North Shore did he die?
So people used to think that it was in the where the Howard Street Cemetery is now in Salem. So in the 1970s, there was a folklorist named Bob Cahill, who really is kind of the one responsible for most of these folk legends and traditions of this idea that Giles Corey cursed the sheriff, you know, when he was being pressed to death, and this idea of, you know, Giles Corey's ghost being, you know, lurking around Howard Street Cemetery. But Emerson Baker, Tad to his friends, sweet, sweet man, one of the best historians on the subject, he was like, no, he would have been pressed just right behind where the jail was. And where the jail used to be was, you know the parking lot of the PBS 6 Museum, it's right next to St. Peter's Church. So there's the old Bell telephone building that you can go in and get your, you know, ID renewed or whatever. It's kind of an office building. It's near the 19th century Gothic-looking jail, which is now condos. So in my book, I do have a bit where it kind of shows where this would have been, and it would have been behind where that building is, I think, where the cars are parked. So, and there's no marker or anything like that, you know. But I could be wrong, you know. We know where the jail was, but exactly where he was led from the jail to be pressed to death, I assume not far from, you know.
And the jail, it's not the one that turned into the bit bar, is it?
No. So that's a different jail, but it's right close. It's like across. It's across St. Peter Street from that. So the place where Giles would have been, I believe, and Tad Baker believed, pressed to death would be within view of that old jail, which was Bit Bar and now condos and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, Ben, thank you.
But these are places that were intentionally forgotten, you know, including the courthouse where these people were, you know, condemned and sentenced to death. I mean, it would have been in the middle of Washington Street, and there's only a very kind of washed out bronze plaque from, you know, the 1900s that so many people miss. They walk by it, but it says, you know, right here on the, you know, in the middle of the street is where the witch trials happened. Yeah.
So how did you formulate the arc with Longfellow and Hawthorne, and like it's like sort of the vague 1860s sort of like that arc that kind of follows through, and like not knowing at the time of reading this the history or like the life of either, to like have that arc. It was just very interesting in like how it sort of like peeked in between all the pieces.
Yeah.
So did you write it like how did you decide to put that in there, and like how did you come up with it?
I've always just been a really big Hawthorne fan, and I really wanted to have him be present, you know, in this book, because so much of what he wrote and created in his life really speaks to the cultural consequences of what happened in Salem, you know, and literary, you know, how its impact on American literature and stuff. That always fascinated me, and I thought, you know, well, you know, if you've got Hawthorne and Longfellow, who were old college buddies. They went to Bowdoin together. They were lifelong friends. They wrote to each other, and so much of what they say in those scenes comes from their letters from each other. Very different men politically, very different men artistically, but